the gig economy is something that I've found super beneficial in my career in a number of different ways. So, and I kind of bring this up in the piece as well, is like lots of people have a perception of what a gig economy worker is, whether that's, an Uber driver or, a DoorDasher or something like that. And that is definitely one part of it, a big part of it that really gets talked about a lot in the news. But you also have people even I bring up in the article, doing really specialized work, even with like national security implications and things like that. So the folks that I brought up in the article, my good friends over at the Independent Women's Forum, they actually did this profile on female truckers. And so this is kind of like the other side of it, is that, these people are dealing with like materials that are vital to America's national security and things like that.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode of the Brian Nichols Show. We're going to jump right into things today, and we're talking all things in the gig economy, contract work, and more. Plus, we're going to be looking at Trump's new labor secretary nominee, Lori Chavez-DeRemer. I'm pretty sure that's how I'm saying her name right, and why she would be a terrible pick for the labor secretary. And I can't do that conversation alone. So joining me today is Victoria Snitsar Churchill from Young Voices. Victoria, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be on with you.
Great to have you on, and I'm looking forward to digging into our conversation today. But before we get started, let's go ahead, just set the stage, Victoria. You wrote an article over at Real Clear Politics. You are a Young Voices contributor. We just had our buddy William on the show. We were talking about Canadians trying to raise the age of eligibility for pension. So love what Young Voices is doing. But yeah, you wrote an article over at Real Clear Politics talking about the Trump labor secretary nominee, and then you just why she would be a terrible pick, right? Let's just set the stage here. Why she is, a leftist wet dream in terms of labor policy. So let's just kind of set the stage before we get there in terms of, why this is a big issue. But first, Victoria, a little bit about your background. Why is this an area you focus so much on, the gig economy? And then we'll dig into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, so like I said, thank you so much for having me on. So I'm Victoria Snitsar Churchill. I'm a political journalist and conservative commentator. I've held a number of different roles in the journalism industry, both going back to my time in college as a student activist on campus, kind of finding my voice there in the conservative and libertarian space, all the way up to now. Today, I both have a full-time role in journalism where I work for a startup media outlet. That's a pretty new position for me over at Upward News. So they're an upstart media outlet. They actually started on Instagram, and now they've got a newsletter. So that's what I do in my day-to-day job. And then, like I said, Young Voices, have been doing commentary with them for, I guess, almost 2 years or over 2 years now. So love being a part of that program. And kind of as Brian, as you and I were talking backstage, Young Voices is really great for those of us that want to stay in and kind of develop some different levels of expertise in things. They really give us opportunities to do that. So right now, this piece that ran in Real Clear Politics is a piece that I wrote for their social mobility fellowship. So it's really all about to me at least, it's really all about pursuing the American dream and finding opportunities that are, I think folks like you and I, we want to see, the free market. We want to see government get out of the way. And the gig economy is something that I've found super beneficial in my career in a number of different ways. So, and, I kind of bring this up in the piece as well, is like, lots of people have a perception of what a gig economy worker is, whether that's, an Uber driver or, a DoorDasher or something like that. And that is definitely one part of it, a big part of it that really gets talked about a lot in the news. But you also have people like I bring up in the article, doing really specialized work, even with like national security implications and things like that. So the folks that I brought up in the article, my good friends over at the Independent Women's Forum, they actually did this profile on female truckers. And so this is kind of like the other side of it, is that, these people are dealing with like materials that are vital to America's national security and things like that. And then, I kind of view myself, I guess, a little bit in the middle. So like I said, with journalism, I actually first started writing and getting paid for my writing when I was a college student. So, in that case, I was a contractor. And then I've worked for media media outlets of all shapes and sizes. So primarily, I worked at one news outlet based here in Northern Virginia, where I live, where we had a few full-time members of staff, but I'd say, at least 30%, if not even up to 50% of our content was from contractors. And, a lot of these were maybe people that had worked for other big name publications, but they just wanted to do something different with their lives. And so, that was a good steady source of income for them. They wrote for that publication. And then I've also been an employee where we outsource a lot of our work, again, in journalism, right? Like maybe you write for a publication that has a very narrow focus and you want to do some things outside of that. So that's another case where I've seen it. And then again, so like I said, I've kind of seen it from both sides. Both have been the kind of the additional employer, the additional labor on a full-time team, as well as being that full-time team member that's got additional people. And then I've also started my own podcast recently, just right before the end of last year, kind of as I was in between jobs. Most recently last year, I was a campaign reporter for the New York Post. And so that ended with the election. And then I spent 2 or 3 months looking for my next opportunity. And so during that whole time, I was freelancing and participating in things like the Young Voices Social Mobility Fellowship, but I also launched my own Substack and podcast to go along with that. And I've actually tried starting my own podcast a couple of times, but I realized that there was some things that I love doing, kind of like what we're doing right now, like having conversations. But when it comes to editing and things like that, that's not necessarily my skill set. And so I went out and, I found somebody that has that skill set, and I brought them onto my team as a contractor. And so I've got a couple of people that I work with, one for scheduling social media posts, one for editing actual videos, one for some graphic design and like motion graphics work I'm getting into. And even if I did want to do raw video editing, I could never do like fancy and nice graphic design stuff. And so, that's a way that I use contractors in my own business. And so, like I said, I've really seen this, I think, from all sides. And then even outside of that, and I've actually written on this before, just as I was moving out to the greater Washington, D.C. area. It's definitely not cheap to live here. So I actually did do some Uber and DoorDash and things like that just to afford to pay my rent for my first couple of years while I was waiting for my media career to kind of get to the place where it even is now. And so, yeah, this is something that, like I said, I've utilized really over the last decade in many different ways in my life. And so I want this to continue to exist, to prosper. And as I bring up in the article, there's already legislation that exists in California known as AB 5, which really cut down the number of gig workers, but it also, as an expert that I point out in the piece over from the Mercatus Center here in Northern Virginia, part of George Mason University, as Leah is her name, she's great on this issue. If anybody's looking for some hard facts to back up maybe any work that they're doing on this topic, but her research actually found that not only did gig economy workplace positions decrease, but overall workforce participation decreased as well. And that is completely contrary to what people that are against this type of work think. They think that these people, they don't necessarily want to opt into this work. They're doing work of full-time employees. And so they're being what's called misclassification. And so there's another kind of in the weeds thing that I talk about in the piece called the ABC test. And so basically in California, if your work meets all of these categories, they class you as a full-time employee, whether you want to be one or you don't want to be one. This is just like the hand of big government just coming down and saying you are this, whether you want it or not. And so this was then put into a piece of federal legislation about 2 years ago in the last Congress. So right now we're in the 119th. This was in the 118th Congress in a bill called the PRO Act. And this was actually part of Kamala Harris's campaign platform. So this Lori Chavez-DeRemer, she was one of 3 Republicans who supported this legislation. Now, as she kind of tried to massage it a little bit in her hearing, which I tuned in, I was actually there on the Hill, on the ground, listening to this hearing. And so kind of her reasoning for that was that she thought that this was something that the people of her district, which she used to represent in Oregon, wanted. So that was kind of her justification. She didn't really come out and say whether, if she was a current member of Congress, she's basically saying, well, I've been a legislator. I'm going to leave the legislating up to the current legislators. And basically my job in the executive branch would be different than previous legislative roles. So that was kind of her justification, which I'm not sure if she really means that. And, I'm kind of actually as a follow-up to this piece, I'm hoping to come out with another one in the next week or so saying, whether other folks that want to keep gig economy work, whether they buy it or not, or whether they think it's political talking points. But so that was kind of her justification. But right off the bat, that supported the PRO Act really made a lot of groups, Republican, conservative, liberty-minded, want to oppose her nomination. And at least kind of the way that I framed that piece was, these are the questions that we need to ask, because we need to get her on the record. And then if this shifts, then, we'll raise an even bigger stink about it as well.
So Victoria, this has been a great setting the stage, right? I actually want to go back even a little bit further, and not so much from the policy itself, but I want to set the stage to understand the argument, right? Because when you take a step back, it just feels like, right? And maybe this is my priors coming into this conversation. It just feels like common sense to say, hey, I have a service that I can do over the internet, and somebody in, name your favorite state here, I'm in Indiana, somebody over in Maryland or Florida, right? They want to hire me to do something. You should be able to do that, right? And that just seems, again, to me like common sense. And yet there are apparently a lot of folks, you mentioned AB 5 in California. We talk about our labor secretary here, who's just saying my constituents like this. Why? Why is there an argument against this idea? I think just to understand that to start would be very beneficial. Could you kind of set the stage there, and like, if you could, right, maybe like steelman the argument from the left, or I don't want to call them the left, just the folks who are in favor of limiting contract work and limiting the freedom of choice where you can work? I don't know. What's the actual argument there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is actually from labor unions. So these were some of the groups that came out to support Chavez-DeRemer's nomination. And as other publications, I think National Review is one that comes to mind, pointed out in their argument to oppose Chavez-DeRemer, they were saying, there's this labor union. They've historically supported not just maybe necessarily Democrats, but like radically leftist Democrats as well.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical. But after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle, and how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
And they're also favoring her. And so they really drew this very stark comparison about the kind of people that these groups typically support. And so the labor union argument is big. Obviously they're powerful. They're across industries, whether that's, blue collar industries or even.
And really quick, Victoria, to those labor unions, what's their argument? Are they just saying that this destroys like price, like salaries? Like what are they even saying beyond saying they're the ones doing it? But like what's their argument? Like what hill are they standing on?
Yeah, I mean, again, saying basically this idea of misclassification. So they're saying these people are doing full-time work, they should be entitled to benefits. But again, obviously that makes labor more expensive, as you and I know, as free market people, free market thinkers, that if you add on, you want to have health insurance and you want to have paid time off, and, even you want to have things like paid family leave, right? Like that makes the actual product or service much more expensive.
Well, and what if I don't want that, right? Like, I just feel like you should be able to say, yeah, I'm going to do work and I'm going to knowingly say, I'm good. I don't need these benefits today or tomorrow or in the next year. Like, it just feels like there is a group of folks who are like, I'm going to push for this legislation because you, Mr. Gig Worker, you just don't know better. You don't know what you need. And I'm going to force down your throat what you need. That's what it feels like. Am I off base?
No, I think you're completely right. Again, it's this hand of big government and their friends who, I consider big labor and big government quite entrenched partners. But, I think also, like, we look at the history, right? Like things like labor unions did play critical roles in American politics, and, advancing things like workplace rights. But that was way back in the day, where I think you really only saw one kind of work, right? Like you think of factory work. That's kind of the first thing for me, for example, that comes to mind when you think of labor unions and picket lines and things like that. You think about factory work. And so that is a very, I think, closed-minded idea of what work looks like. And so in the new economy, which a gig economy is a major part of that, you have this understanding that, not everybody wants to be in a physical workplace between the hours of 9 and 5, or, if you're factory work, you want to do, round the clock shifts, right? And so you have 3 shifts based on various timings. And that was basically the only kind of work that was available for the majority of the country. But, now, I can say I'm going to wake up at 6 in the morning and, I'm going to do these 5 different things on my own time before I clock in for my full-time job. In my day-to-day job, I am remote. So that was actually kind of, as I was talking about, like I went through a time when I was looking for my next opportunity. And so that was actually something I was very conscious of. I want to have the opportunity to have that flexibility. And, particularly for women and mothers and people in those positions, for example, this is something that they want. And so actually, as I mentioned in the piece, the Independent Women's Forum, I think this is something that they focus on for that reason, is because they actually find it oppressive to women when they aren't given these opportunities. And there's also stories and, data to back up that women, at least in this day and age, do tend to take advantage of these opportunities longer and more frequently. But, like I said, we're not just, or they don't advocate for these opportunities just for women, but I think this is part of their justification as well. And so, obviously this whole idea of like right to work and things like that. So this was another thing that was brought up in the labor secretary's hearing, again, is that they want this one size fits all prescription, and anything that is against that, it really rubs them the wrong way. And so they get all this money, right, from their membership if they are a labor union. And, in states that aren't a right to work state, they're right, like they're compelling people to give them this money that then they use for political capital, which is obviously one of these arguments when you look at the labor picture in a bigger place. And so that was kind of, again, the way that I framed this article, is that, I'm saying big labor is going to be in the room, big business is going to be in the room. Small business needs a voice that is at least equal to what those groups will intrinsically come with, that kind of capital, that kind of political power. And so, myself, and there's another woman who I'm actually interviewing, hopefully for my next piece, Kim Cavan. She's huge on this issue. She's been working on this issue for a number of years. She runs the website and Substack Freelance Busting. And so I think she was kind of saying some of these things that I was, of like, these are the questions that we want asked. And because freelancers there are some freelancing unions, which to me, again, like kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way, because I think freelancing, you want to be anti-union. So there actually are a couple of freelancing unions, but for the most part, as an independent business owner, as an independent contractor, you don't have a lobbyist in the room. You don't have somebody behind in those closed door meetings. And so those of us that participate in this economy, we know, the power of the internet. We know the power of getting our own voices out there, because oftentimes that's how we make a living. And so to me, that was, again, intrinsically like very aligned with the core of the issue, was also spreading that message this way, because there is no other way. But we also have found in the past that it's equally, as if not even more powerful than those other voices that do have those allies and advantages, just intrinsically built in. And again, these are systems a lot of the times that have been entrenched for decades. And so if you're doing something new, you're doing something fresh, you have to get creative.
It just, and again, this is my political priors, maybe, or just, I don't know, like my brain has trouble understanding how anybody outside of the bureaucratic structures of big labor or big business would be against this. And I'm just like, I'm thinking to just people I talk to in everyday life, like just no politics, right? And from folks who I know are self-identified Democrats to Republicans to libertarians to progressives, like when you talk about this, it just feels like that they get it, like why this whole like anti-gig economy is bad. Like when you lay it out as black and white of like, hey, I want to go work for this person and I can't because there is an entity, in this case, a federal bureaucracy, that's trying to stop me from doing that. And therefore, I can't earn money to pay for groceries or pay for my gas or pay for my rent, right? And now I am in a worse spot than I would have been otherwise. Like, I'm having trouble. It's nothing about you. It's just like, it's the mentality of making the sale on the side of the unions, of big business. I don't see how they feel that they have like the moral positive side of the argument. I just, there's something missing here. And I guess, Victoria, this goes to why there has been such a change across the country over the past year. And that is that it seems like more and more folks are starting to speak out and say, no, this is crazy. Like, look at our federal bureaucracy. Doge is going in and with the proverbial chainsaw, like cutting down all of these different barriers, right? Starting to expose where the gravy train has been going. And I guess, let me ask it very black and white. Is this just a follow the money conversation, right? Like just look to see where the dollars are going. They're going to the big unions. They're going to the lobbying organizations. They're going to big business. Like, is that it? Is that as black and white as it could possibly be, is just follow the money?
I mean, as a journalist in my day job, a lot of the times the answer is follow the money. But I also think, again, it also part of it, I think, comes down to mindset, right? Like people that are even a generation older than you and I are, they come from an age where you could, sit in the same company for 40 years and you could work those 40 hours a week and you wouldn't have any problems. You could have, a 3-bedroom house and 2.5 kids and 2 new cars. And like, I also think that's part of it, is that for a lot of times, like people's, I mean, especially out here in DC, right? Like we're really tied. Our identities are really tied to our jobs. But I think historically it's been even more so. And so when you talk about that in that context, like the fact that somebody would even want other work or outside work, I think is quite new, just like from the time frame of history. And so I think that's why like a lot of these, kind of as I was talking about, like these entrenched systems exist, because people haven't realized that, again, like not everybody wants to go sit in an office 9 to 5. Not everybody wants to go work in an assembly line, from 9 to 5. And so this idea that like you want, or I mean, like, for example, I think back to college, right? Like if you wanted to get an on-campus job, you could only work it 20 hours a week. And so the illusion that the college was creating for themselves, in my view, was that if you work 20 hours a week, then you have a lot of time to focus on your studies, and then you'll be a good student and you'll be so well-rounded and you'll be tied to your campus community, because this is how you contribute to campus, is you have your on-campus job. Right. But what we saw, I have a lot of close personal friends that then had that campus job, and then they would also go and find another 1 or even 2 or sometimes 3 jobs in the community because they wanted to work more than that 20 hours. But again, like the college was saying, well, we can't give you more than 20 hours, regardless of what you want. Right. You might need more money. You might want, you might have more time. It doesn't matter if you're taking 12 credit hours or 18 a semester. This is what we're prescribing you. This is our prescription for your life. And then outside of that, people had to go and make do. Right. And so I think that is a very clear parallel with the real world, that, again, traditionally you think your 40 hours a week of a job is going to take care of your life. And I mean, again, just kind of the hard reality is for a lot of people, it doesn't. Or The other element of it, like, which is why I still love freelance work and independent contracting work and gig work, is that, if you're not feeling satisfied in your day-to-day job, which isn't the case for me now, but has been in the past, you can also use this work to grow your portfolio or to take on additional things, gain additional skills, which again makes you, more employable in the future, and it allows you to pursue further opportunities. But if you're the company, you don't want your employees doing that, right? And so again, this is, I think, where you see the system is built up in a way to, keep people in the status quo. But as I talked about in the beginning, right? Like, if you want to do things on your own terms, live your own life, pursue your American dream, which is, again, kind of a subcontext for everything that I do, is because I am a first generation American and I just love having the freedoms that we have here in this country. And so, I think gig work and the gig economy and upskilling and, making more money to achieve higher goals that you might have for yourself, that's all new, right? Like, even, regardless of how you feel about him, right? Like, a lot of people know Dave Ramsey, right? And he says, pay off your mortgage as fast as you can. That like, people aren't used to doing that because they have, their 40-year career, and for 30 years of that, they'll pay off their mortgage. And so this whole idea that, like, you can have freedom as soon as you pay off your mortgage, right? Like, Dave rubs a lot of people the wrong way because that's just not how people think traditionally. And so just cases like that, again, that is something that is outside of what's traditionally accepted. And so, on my show, like, there's a reason why I called it Freedom Shots, is because it's these ideas that are just outside of the mainstream, whether that's politically or, even economically and things like that. Is like, this pursuit of freedom is kind of the overall theme of the show. And so I bring in various guests to talk about what that looks like in their lives. But, again, I think at the core, that's really what it comes down to. It's saying, I'm not going to accept what this one size fits all prescription that's given to me either by, like I said, by a company or by the government, or even, like, a lot of the times by society as a whole. I don't like any of that, and I'm going to go and chart my own path. And so for me, gig work, independent contracting, freelancing, whatever you want to call it, for me, it's a means to that different end from what everybody else wants to do.
So we're getting towards the tail end of the show, Victoria, and I'll start my final thoughts with this. Everybody who's listened to the show for at least a few episodes should know I'm a sales executive, right? So at the end of the day, I always like to reframe things in a sales mindset. And as you're outlining this, you mentioned, like, the status quo. And actually, we were talking to William about the pensions there in Canada earlier, behind the curtain. It was earlier today, but in podcast world, it was last week. Magic of camera. But no, with that, I was talking about the status quo folks, and I call them the status quoitarians. I just made that up. But, like, when I go into a sales environment, right, and I'm talking to a prospect, if I ever hear well, this is how we've always done things, I'm just like, good grief. That is one of the worst things I can ever hear, right? Because if you go back to the definition of insanity, it's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, right? And if we remove ourselves from our political priors, we kind of zoom out, right? And we get that, like, 30,000 foot overview. That feels like what this conversation is. And you mentioned, there's folks who their knee-jerk reaction to Dave Ramsey telling them to pay off your mortgage so you can live financially free is, no, I don't want to live financially free. I want to have my 30-year mortgage at my fixed interest rate of 7.5%. Like, what? No, why are you regurgitating the status quo? And to the average person who's listening to today's episode, and maybe they're very much on board with the status quo, and they hear Victoria talking about promoting gig work and contract work and saying, this is bonkers. Like just take a step back and ask yourself, is it me? Because when you look at the younger generations, and Victoria, I think it's very safe to say, you and I are part of those younger generations. We're very much in this, like, this gig world, like Gen Z and now Gen Alpha. They live in this world. Like, a majority of their time is spent online doing stuff. And if you're a TikToker, right, and you have your TikTok store, or you're a graphic design artist, like you mentioned, or, a video editor, you want to do Fiverr work, right? Fiverr or Upwork, like all these different organizations that exist, you can work from anywhere, and you can work with anybody at any time. Because it's your work. It's you. You are the labor. And you don't need to have a labor union of other graphic design artists who are freelancers, even though you mentioned that there are some who exist, which still blows my mind. But I guess, I look at this from a good ideas don't require force, right? So let's just continue leading. By the way, if you want to get the hat, good ideas don't require force, head to briannicholsshow.com/shop. But like the ideas of liberty, we don't need to force feed them down people's throats. When your average person realizes the benefits, the value of a true free market privatized solution, and they're able to experience benefits for themselves, it becomes inherent, right? I don't have to convince you that the free market approach or the freelance approach or the contractor approach or the gig economy approach is better than another approach. It's that I know, Mr. or Mrs. Consumer or worker or whoever you may be, that you are seeing the inherent value yourself. Therefore, you already know the value. You already know the benefits. So it's now a matter of just connecting the dots, right? I need to help you understand that where you are today, getting the value of this Fiverr work or this Upwork or this just contract work, that is a result of what we're talking about here today. And that right there, I think, speaks to where we're going to win, because so many folks in the younger generations are already experiencing that for themselves. Now it's on us to help tie the dots together. So that's my final thoughts for today, Victoria. Go ahead, bring us home, and give us a call to action. New podcast, where can folks go ahead, follow the show, support you, obviously, and then we want to see some more bangers come out here like you have over on Real Clear Politics. So where can they go ahead, check out your articles as they get released?
Yeah, so best way to keep touch with me personally is on X. It's going to be Snits_Churchill. So it's kind of a combination of my maiden name and my new married last name, shortened. So Snits_Churchill, SNITS_CHURCHY, or on Instagram, Victoria Snitsar Churchill, just my full name with no spaces. And then, kind of as a call to action, I think you bring up a really good point, right? Like these status quo-tarians. I feel like I want that on a t-shirt. So if you add that to the store, let me know. But like, if you like the status quo, you can keep it. Just don't prescribe that to me. I think that's the most like liberty argument at its core, is saying, just make sure it's available for me. You don't have to take part in it. You can be okay doing what you've always done, but make sure that my opportunity, like if I don't like what you've always done, I want to be able to go do something different. And so I think that's really what this argument boils down to at its core. And then, also with Young Voices, they've got my page on there on their talent page. So, that's where all of my work for them will be, both media hits like this one, as well as articles. And we'll be doing a follow-up. This Lori Chavez-DeRemer stuff is fresh. They just had her hearing. They'll be having a vote coming up for her, both to vote her out of committee and then whether to confirm or deny. My prediction is that she will be the next Labor Secretary, but that doesn't mean that we give up our fight. Like she's basically indicated that despite her congressional record, which is kind of what I brought up in this piece that we talked about today, that, she was doing that to represent the people that she represented. But if she is in office as the next U.S. Secretary of Labor, she'll be following guidance from the president and the White House, etc. And again, if you speak out, if you are in places like Real Clear Politics, they'll see that, right? They'll come up. That's where, like I mentioned, I live in D.C. Like me and my crazy people like me that live out here in this crazy place of Washington, D.C. We read that stuff, right? And so that's a great way to point out to the power players what your concerns are and make sure that they're heard. So, I think, like I said, regardless of her status as the next Secretary of Labor, we've brought up these issues, and those of us that care about these issues, we're going to keep pushing to make sure. And so kind of in particular, again, very, very niche minutia thing, but in that article, there's basically a really bad policy, and it's a policy, it's not a law, because it was something made by the Biden admin executive branch called executive rulemaking, but it's bad, and we want the Trump administration to get rid of it basically either way. So, on things like that, again, these are these niche things that only like really wonky DC people care about, but it's something that affects, as I bring up in the article, it's 60 million people participate in gig work. So we're huge, and we just need to make sure that we're loud. And, I'm optimistic either way, but I'm going to keep using my voice, and I encourage other people to keep using their own.
Keep using your voice. Keep using your young voice. I'm just kidding. I had to try to make a transition there to support Young Voices. Folks, Young Voices, they're doing amazing work helping bring, I would say, a lot of the up and coming thinkers and doers here in our political world, in the world of public policy, to the forefront. And I have been a long time supporter of Young Voices. My good buddy there, Caleb Franz, he's been doing some amazing work over at Young Voices, helping guide folks through the program. Hey, by the way, I got to be a mentor back in the day for Young Young Voices. I did that for about 2 years. So that was fun as up and coming folks were going through the movement. And you know what? I said to Nicholas, who is the PR guy here for Young Voices, I was like, hey, open door policy. I want to get more Young Voices folks on the show because not only are you guys talking about issues that really matter, but you're doing so in a way that speaks to the generations that need to hear it. Because we just saw, by the way, I'll end with this. We just saw in this past election, Gen Z do something remarkable. And that is cut the point differential of when they were voting for a Democrat versus a Republican by like, I think it was like 20 something points. It might have been even more. The fact that the younger generations are starting to say, yeah, no, this old way of doing things doesn't work. That gives me hope. And seeing folks like Young Voices out there actually talking to that younger generation, love it. So with that being said, Victoria, thank you so much for joining the show. And thank you for all the work you're doing, raising awareness to, yes, this very real issue that impacts over a fourth of Americans? Yeah, that's a big deal. So let's go ahead and continue talking about it. So with that being said, please go ahead, support Victoria. Go check out her article over at Real Clear Politics, link in the show notes. And with that, yes, please go ahead and support Young Voices. You can find yours truly over on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is you consume your social media content at B Nichols Liberty. For the podcast, you can find it on all your favorite podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or if you're a video type of person, head over to YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, X. We are uploading the video show in its entirety over on those platforms. All I ask is you hit that subscribe button and head down below and leave us a comment that helps the algos realize that people are watching and they're sharing and they're talking about what's happening. So if you find yourself in the status quo-tarian camp and you're like, but I like the labor unions dictating what I can do for my job. Okay, go ahead, make that argument. And of course, be prepared to have a nice, respectful conversation and debate with folks in the comments who will say, you're wrong. I would probably be one of them. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Victoria Snitsar Churchill. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.